and how its pollen dust is carried. These two flowers are the common bird's foot trefoil, Lotus corniculatus, and the early orchis, Orchis mascula, which you may find in almost any meadow in the spring and early summer. The bird's foot trefoil, figure 62, you will find almost anywhere all through the summer, and you will know it from other flowers very like it by its leaf, which is not a true trefoil, for behind the three usual leaflets of the clover and the shamrock leaf, it has two small leaflets near the stalk. The flower, you will notice, is shaped very like the flower of a pea, and indeed it belongs to the same family, called the Papilionaceae or butterfly family, because the flowers look something like an insect flying. In all these flowers, the top petal stands up like a flag to catch the eye of the insect, and for this reason botanists call it the standard. Below it are two side petals called the wings, and if you pick these off, you will find that the remaining two petals are joined together at the tip in a shape like the keel of a boat. For this reason they are called the keel. Notice as we pass that these last two petals have in them a curious little hollow or depression, and if you look inside the wings you will notice a little knob that fits into this hollow and so locks the two together. We shall see by and by that this is important. Week 30. Now let us look at the half flower when it is cut open and see what there is inside. There are 10 stamens in all, enclosed with the stigma in the keel. 9 are joined together and 1 is by itself. The anthers of 5 of these stamens burst open while the flower is still a bud. But the other stamens go on growing and push the pollen dust, which is very moist and sticky, right up into the tip of the keel. Here you see it lies right round the stigma, but as we saw it before in the geranium, the stigma is not ripe and sticky yet, and so it does not use the pollen grains. Now suppose that a bee comes to the flower. The honey she has to fetch lies inside the tube, and the one stamen being loose, she is able to get her proboscis in. But if she is to be any use to the flower, she must uncover the pollen dust. See how cunningly the flower has contrived this. In order to put her head into the tube, the bee must stand upon the wings, and her weight bends them down, but they are locked to the keel by the knob fitting in the hole, and so the keel is pushed down too, and the sticky pollen dust is uncovered and comes right against the stomach of the bee and sticks there. As soon as she is done feeding and flies away, up go the wings and the keel with them, covering up any pollen that remains ready for next time. Then, when the bee goes to another flower, as she touches the stigma as well as the pollen, she leaves some of the foreign dust upon it, and the flower uses that rather than its own because it is better for its seeds. If, however, no bee happens to come to one of these flowers, after a time the stigma becomes sticky and it uses its own pollen. And this is perhaps one reason why the bird's foot trefoil is so very common, because it can do its own work if the bee does not help it. Now we come lastly to the orchis flower. Mr. Darwin has written a whole book on the many curious and wonderful ways in which orchids tempt bees and other insects to fertilise them. We can only take the simplest, but I think you will say that even this blossom is more like a conjurer's box than you would have supposed it possible that a flower could be. Let us examine it closely. It has 6 deep red covering leaves, figure 62, 3 belonging to the calyx or outer cup, and 3 belonging to the corolla or crown of the flower. But all 6 are coloured alike, except that the large one in front, called the lip, has spots and lines upon it, which will suggest to you at once that they point to the honey. But where are the anthers and where is the stigma? Look just under the arch made by those 3 bending flower leaves, and there you will see 2 small slits, and in these some little club-shaped bodies, which you can pick out with the point of a needle. One of these enlarged is shown. It is composed of sticky grains of pollen held together by fine threads on the top of a thin stalk, and at the bottom of the stalk there is a little round body. This is all that you will find to represent the stamens of the flower. When these masses of pollen, or pollinia as they are called, are within the flower, the knob at the bottom is covered by a little lid, shutting them in like the lid of a box. And below this lid you will see 2 yellowish lumps which are very sticky. These are the top of the stigma, and they are just above the seed vessel which you can see in the lowest flower in the picture. Now let us see how this flower gives up its pollen. When a bee comes to look for honey in the orchis, she alights on the tip, and guided by the lines makes straight for the opening just in front of the stigmas. Putting her head into this opening, she pushes down onto the spur, where, by biting the inside skin, she gets some juicy sap. Notice that she has to bite, which takes time. You'll see at once that she must touch the stigmas in going in, and so give them any pollen she has on her head. But she also touches the little lid, and it flies instantly open, bringing the glands at the end of the pollen masses against her head. These glands are moist and sticky, and while she is gnawing inside of the spur, they dry a little and cling to her head, and she brings them out with her. Darwin once caught a bee with as many as 16 of these pollen masses clinging to her head. But if the bee went into the next flower with these pollinia sticking upright, she would simply put them in the same slits in the next flower. She would not touch them against the stigma. Nature, however, has provided against this. As the bee flies along, the glands sticking to its head dry more and more, and as they dry, they curl up and drag the pollen masses down, so that instead of standing upright, they point forwards. And now, when the bee goes into the next flower, she will thrust them right against the sticky stigmas, and as they cling there, the fine threads which hold the grains together break away and the flower is fertilised. If you will gather some of these orchids during your next spring walk in the wood, and will put a pencil down the tube to represent the head of the bee, you may see the little box open and the 2 pollen masses cling to the pencil. Then, if you draw it out, you may see them gradually bend forwards, and by thrusting your pencil into the next flower, you may see the grains of pollen break away, and you will have followed out the work of a bee. Do not such wonderful contrivances as these make us long to know and understand all the hidden work that is going on around us, among the flowers, the insects, and all forms of life? I have been able to tell you but a very little, but I can promise you that the more you examine, the more you will find marvellous histories such as these in simple field flowers. Long as we have known how useful honey was to the bee, and how it could only get it from flowers, yet it was not until quite lately that we have learnt to follow out Sprengel's suggestion, and to trace the use which the bee is to the flower. But now that we have once had our eyes opened, every flower teaches us something new, and we find that each plant adapts itself in a most wonderful way to the insects which visit it, both so as to provide them with honey, and at the same time to make them unconsciously do it good service. And so we learn that even among insects and flowers, those who do most for others receive most in return. The bee and the flower do not either of them reason about the matter, they only go on living their little lives as nature guides them, helping and improving each other. Think for a moment how it would be if a plant used up all its sap for its own life, and did not give a penny to make the drop of honey in its flower. The bees would soon find out that these particular flowers were not worth visiting, and the flower would not get its pollen dust carried, and would have to do its own work, and grow weakly and small. Or suppose, on the other hand, that the bee bit a hole in the bottom of the flower and so got at the honey, as indeed they sometimes do, then she would not carry the pollen dust, and so would not keep up the healthy strong flowers which make her daily food. But this, as you see, is not the rule. On the contrary, the flower feeds the bee, and the bee quite unconsciously helps the flower to make its healthy seed. Nay, more, when you are able to read all that has been written on the subject, you will find that we have good reason to think that the flowerless plants of the coal period have gradually put on the beautiful colours, sweet scents, and graceful shapes of our present flowers in consequence of the necessity of attracting insects, and thus we owe our lovely flowers to the mutual kindliness of plants and insects. And is there nothing beyond this? Surely there is. Flowers and insects, as we have seen, act without thought or knowledge of what they are doing. But the law of mutual help which guides them is the same which bids you and me be kind and good to all those around us if we would lead useful and happy lives. And when we see that the great power which rules over our universe makes each work for the good of all, even in such humble things as bees and flowers, and that beauty and loveliness come out of the struggle and striving of all living things, then if our own life be sometimes difficult and the struggle hard to bear, we learn from the flowers that the best way to meet our troubles is to lay up our little drop of honey for others, sure that when they come to sip it, they will, even if unconsciously, give us new vigour and courage in return. And now we have arrived at the end of those subjects which we selected out of the fairyland of science. You must not for a moment imagine, however, that we have in any way exhausted our fairy domain. On the contrary, we have scarcely explored even the outskirts of it. The history of a grain of salt, a butterfly's life, or the labours of an ant would introduce us to fairies and wonders quite as interesting as those we have spoken in these lectures. while a flash of lightning, an explosion in a coal mine, or the eruption of a volcano would bring us into the presence of